Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Classical Pairings Host Challenge. I'm your host, Nick Johnson, and every week, Classical Music Indy is sending me a piece of local music and a local spirit that I am mixing together by coming up with a cocktail that I think pairs with the music well. Today, we're going to be listening to a piece of music called Chirp Fly Soar by Salazar, and we're going to be pairing that with a dark chocolate old fashioned, which our main spirit is going to be West Fork Whiskey's The Colonel, made right here in Indianapolis. So stick around for how to make this cocktail and how it pairs with this piece of music. All right, let's go ahead and go through the ingredients of the dark chocolate old fashioned. As I said, we're going to be using the Colonel's bourbon whiskey from West Fork. This is a kind of wheat forward bourbon that works really well with this cocktail, and especially I think it works well with the orange and chocolate notes that we're going to be going for. We're going to be using Campari, which is a type of Amaro, which I'll be talking about in just a minute. We're going to use a Creme de Cacao, or maybe it's Creme de Cocoa, I don't really know. We'll say cacao because we're fancy and this is classical music. So we're going to be using, just for a little bit of chocolate flavor, we're going to use a dark chocolate bitters. This is actually called a mole bitters. I originally said I didn't want to focus too much on bitters in this, but I opened the floodgates last week, so here's some more bitters. And we need an orange peel and a sugar cube, and that's all that we really need. You'll actually remember, if you've been following along, the first week I did an absinthe drip using these sugar cubes, and so I thought it would be fun to bring that back in. So let's go ahead and make the dark chocolate old fashioned. We're going to start by dropping in a sugar cube, and you don't want one that's too big. I don't like this cocktail super sweet because I'm going to be looking for sort of dark chocolate notes within this. Onto that sugar cube, I'm going to drip 3 or 4 drips of these bitters. You probably honestly don't need to do this directly on the sugar cube, but it looks really neat and it's very satisfying. So why not? I mean, right now, with everything going on in the world, anything that brings us just a brief little bit of satisfaction is maybe worth it. So we have that sugar cube now soaked in the dark chocolate bitters. Now I found when I was experimenting with this that I wanted just a little bit more chocolate flavor. And so for this, I'm gonna add half a teaspoon of this Creme de Cacao, as I've decided we're calling it today. So not even, even a half shot would be way too much for this, but just a little bit to give us a little bit more sweetness and a little bit more chocolate flavor. So again, this is a half teaspoon. We'll dump that on the sugar cube too, because that feels just as good. And now we're gonna muddle these together. I'm realizing maybe I just sort of came up with this drink because I wanted something that was very satisfying, because now we're gonna get to use a muddler. If you don't own a muddler, really just a spoon would work, but just crushing a sugar cube into chocolate is a infinitely satisfying thing to do. What you're going to be left with then is basically just sort of a chocolatey kind of sugary paste here that is going to be the base of this spirit. Or not really the base of the spirit, like the main flavor that we're adding to this cocktail. So now we're going to add half a shot of Campari. So Campari is a type of Amaro, or an Italian digestif or aperitif, so like either before or after, that has, Campari in particular, especially as sort of the really widely available brands, is very bitter and has a really nice crimson color. For this specific cocktail, I wanted a mix of dark chocolate with orange, and a very bitter orange. And I felt that the Campari we tried this with an Aperol, which is also very commonly available. I thought the Aperol was just a little too sweet and a little too fruity for this. But if Aperol is what you have at home, that one would work just fine. Campari's been around since about the 1860s. It is a major liqueur in many cocktails. In fact, using Campari and bourbon, this is more similar perhaps to a boulevardier than an old-fashioned. I'll talk about why I chose to call this an old-fashioned when we get to the music here in just a bit. So that was half a shot of Campari. I'm now going to add some ice cubes to start that chilling. And then we're going to just add a shot or an ounce of West Fork's bourbon. This is the Colonel. They have a couple different bourbons. I like this one because it is a very wheat-heavy bourbon, by which I mean it has some sweetness and a very soft ending. So this one cleans really nicely at the end. We're gonna give that a nice stir to chill it. You'll notice that even the color of this is really neat. It's that sort of deep red from the Campari, but it's kind of more of almost like a maroon or a really crimson-y color. And we're just getting this nice and chilled and getting the sugar all mixed in with it. And then we are simply going to garnish this with a little peel of an orange. We originally wanted to get a blood orange for this, but we couldn't find one right now, so this is a Cara Cara orange. I have no idea what that means. You don't come here. I just dropped that one, so let's make another one. You don't come here for orange facts. You come here for me rambling about bitters and music. So let's just pretend that a Cara Cara orange is the right orange to use. So what I'm going to be doing with this, I don't want to rub this all over the rim. I don't want too much. I'm just going to do a little bit of a crack, and I didn't even get a very big peel here. I'm wanting it very subtle because I'm mostly wanting the interplay of the bitter orange from the Campari, the dark chocolate from these two with the wheated bourbon here, and then the orange just gives it this nice sort of aroma on top of that. So there we have it, a dark chocolate old fashioned. I don't want the name to fool you. It's not super chocolate forward, but what I get at the end of this drink is sort of the bitter flavor of dark chocolate. It's really kind of fascinating because we get the chocolate notes from here, the bitterness, and then the wheat gives us sort of like a smooth base for that all to ride in. And so it sort of ends like you've just bitten into like a very high cocoa percentage dark chocolate. And then the very front of the drink, so that was the back, the very front of the drink, we get the corn from the bourbon with the orange. It's very sort of citrusy and bright. And then it ends with this smooth but also dark kind of overtone. So now that you have your cocktail in hand, let's go ahead and talk about this piece by Eric Salazar. So Eric Salazar is a local composer and clarinetist. You can find him on social media if you look up The Clarinet Guy. He does multiple different genres, both as a performer and as a composer. You have maybe seen him do performances around town, or once we're able to start doing that again, I'm sure he will. He's one of these musicians who is using acoustic orchestral instruments and experimenting with new different types of sounds by running a pedal board, like a guitarist might. So he's got distortion pedals and delay pedals. And he's able to get brand new sounds out of the clarinet that Mozart would have only been able to dream of getting in his music. And in fact, the piece we're going to hear, you're going to hear him performing on the clarinet, and the sound is going to keep getting more and more changed and distorted until we're going to end up with almost a guitar-like sound within the piece. Which I think it's really brilliant and fascinating to just listen to these slow, subtle changes in timbre or tone color within the piece. Eric also writes a lot of sort of atmospheric music, specifically, in fact, to be used for role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons or other tabletop games. He's got several albums on Spotify that do just that. In fact, this piece you can find on Spotify. I will admit that I happen to be in one of his Dungeons and Dragons groups, and it is a lot of fun, and he writes the music for it, and it's a blast. But I'll say, even if you don't do that sort of thing, if you don't play those sorts of games, his music is really great to put in the background and just give you a different sense of reality, or just change your experience in a different way. And it reminds me of Eric Satie's furniture music in that sense. If you know those works. But these compositions that you're not necessarily supposed to actively listen to, but that you're supposed to allow kind of paint the surroundings in a new color. So you experience even whatever the thing is you're doing in a more sort of fantastical or dramatic or contemplative or imaginative sort of way. And in fact, if you go through one of his albums, you actually get kind of all of those emotions. So this piece, Chirp Fly Soar, has this piece reminds me of kind of a classical era or maybe a romantic era fantasy or improvisation, like you might hear on the keyboard. There's a sort of a bed of kind of experimental, electronic, but mostly tonal sort of music. And then the clarinet part that he writes over it sounds improvisatory. And then using the pedal, the timbre keeps changing and changing and changing. So just like with the fantasy, it keeps getting more and more sort of out and into the explorations of the composer's brain and the performer's style. And that happens in this piece, Chirp Fly Soar. With this cocktail, I wanted, therefore, because I'm getting these sort of 19th and early 20th century kind of feelings from Eric's music, I wanted to call it an old-fashioned because that kind of made sense to me. I also thought orange is a common sort of flavor that you would add to an old-fashioned. You normally would not add Campari, but I wanted to even amplify the orange even more and then add the chocolate because I think it matches this piece that we're sort of playing with timbre, we're playing with color, and we're coming up with sort of a new experience by using old techniques, which Eric does in a lot of his music. So I've been talking enough. Let's go ahead and listen to Chirp Fly Soar by Eric Salazar. Well, I hope you've enjoyed Chirp Fly Soar by Eric Salazar. Go listen to the rest of the piece on Spotify, and then check out his several other albums where he's doing music of all different types. So this is actually the last week that we have planned for these host challenges, but we have very exciting news. Season 2 of Classical Pairings is going to be released on June 19th. This is something we have been working on a very long time. In fact, most of the season was actually ready before the pandemic, but we wanted to do a few more episodes to explore what's been going on in the city during this pandemic. And so we have 3 episodes that we're going to start with. I've been recording them here at home over Zoom with local musicians and local leaders in the food and drink industry, just like the regular episode. We talk some in these episodes about what it's been like to be a musician when all the gigs are canceled, or what it's like to own a restaurant. But we do the thing we normally do. We have a lot of fun. We get kind of silly. We pair cocktails with music, or food with music. And then the other episodes were all taped before the pandemic. There's one really special one I did in Brazil where I had a lunch that lasted 6 hours, because that's how they did lunch. And I was with an Amazonian chef who was using ingredients from the rainforest I had never heard of. It was amazing. You aren't going to want to miss that episode. So June 19th, you can find it on all major podcast platforms. So thank you so much. I'm Nick Johnson from Classical Music Indy. Cheers.